I wanted to figure out how bad is throwing a stone in a glass house, because clearly we have to ask this question.
I'm now mad at you twice already today.
Man, it's gonna go up. You know that it's not gonna be just twice. You've known me for long enough. I'm gonna make you mad way more than that.
All right, then explain to us how throwing rocks is bad.
So, I'm making an assumption here. My big assumption here, that I think is a pretty safe assumption, is that for these glass houses, we want to use tempered glass. So tempering is basically a process where you do like heating and chemical processes on the glass as you're making it. That one makes it stronger than regular glass. It's roughly 4 times stronger than standard glass with the same like thickness and size and whatnot. And sort of more importantly for safety in this super glassy world, when tempered glass breaks, it doesn't just break into like shards like glass does kind of in your mind. It crumbles into like grains almost, right? They're kind of like big. You've seen tempered glass break before at some point probably. And it's like little cubey pieces of glass that are just much safer if they're shattering than like the big shards. So I figure that's probably just for safety a good call. So we had to figure out how much force we actually need to break glass, which was really, really frustrating to find, actually. The biggest reason being that is going to vary based on like the size of the piece of glass, because glass breaks because it flexes, right? So it's going to flex more easily with a bigger piece of glass. So there's not just like a standard number you can find, but I was going to try anyway.
but that didn't stop me from continuing to Google.
So my thought here is I just needed to find a like somewhat accepted number for a like whatever the standard size piece of glass is, and assume we would make our houses out of that. I figured that was the only way I could actually do this in any sort of reasonable way. So let's find a number. So the first one I found was sourced from a website that no longer exists and the domain is parked, which is a pretty bad start. But that had 24,000 psi, which is pound force per square inch, which is kind of like the standard pressure unit to break tempered glass. I didn't want to use that if I didn't have to, because I found a couple places, but both links led back to the same website, which was, once again, no longer existing, which seemed rough. It was, admittedly, as far as I can tell, a like glass supplier, so I thought it was probably at least somewhat safe, but not ideal. So my goal, I wanted to find a source from the ASTM, which is the American Society for Testing and Materials, which I'm pretty sure we've talked about before. They just make like standards for materials and testing. That one you probably could have figured out on your own.
And they're American.
Yeah, they're everywhere.
Yeah.
Like if you work in any construction or technical job that involves literally anything that requires materials to have specific properties to work, you're probably familiar with ASTM.
Right. Yeah. So they had one that was a document for standards for tempered glass, but it cost $50, and I wasn't going to spend $50 on this. So I tried to Google around
Ben's
and find...
level of commitment, not spending $50 on glass
I had to
research.
put a lot of money into turnips this morning, so, you know, it's not real money. I feel like I should clarify this in case people don't understand that joke. Anyway, I tried to, Google around a little bit for anyone who just happened to have put it up online. And I actually couldn't find it, which was surprising. Although I did find a listing, like a document that was all of the ASTM standards documents. And it had roughly 50 names like of documents per page, and it had 260 pages, which...
There are a lot of materials.
Yeah, there's a lot of materials. So... Long story short, I was forced to use the number from the non-existent website. So we're going to assume that 24,000 PSI is right. To be fair, from like the bit of stuff I could see other places, that looked reasonable. So I don't think it's that far off if it's not completely accurate, but it gives us at least a pretty good frame of reference, I think. So our next step is to figure out how much force a thrown rock is going to have, which is kind of tricky to figure out because obviously rocks are different, sizes and weights, and there's not a good... The easiest way to like find that is to... You're going to need like the speed it's moving at, and there's not good databases of, thrown rock speeds. But what you can get good information on for like throwing speeds is baseball. So I'm going to use that and then branch out from there. So the average, like random average person baseball throwing speed is around 60 miles per hour for like a reasonably fit, like adult male.
Is that for like a pitch, or is that just like a general? Okay.
That's a pitch. So I'm sort of use that just because once again, there's better like numbers for pitching because there's a lot of like analysis of pitching.
Mm-hmm.
So we're going to say 60 miles per hour is our baseball thrown speed. And you can use like the mass, velocity, and time of impact. So like the amount of time that the impact takes before it either, fractures or bounces off to calculate the impact force. So we have that 60 miles per hour. Baseball's mass is about 145 grams. For impact duration, the impact duration of a ball on a bat is 0.7 milliseconds. That's not necessarily going to stay entirely the same because glass is different than a baseball bat, obviously. But I'm going to use that anyway because it's just what I had. And by those numbers, we get about 11,000 newtons of impact force at the peak. So I make another assumption here on the surface area of the baseball that's in contact and impact. The diameter for baseball is about 3 inches, so I said about 1 square inch of impact. Once again, don't have a good number on this. This is what people were saying for like their calculations on baseball, so I think it's reasonable. But doing that, I only wound up with 2,500 PSI, which felt wrong, but I checked a couple times with like different calculators and like checking my numbers again, and apparently it's only 2,500 PSI, which is far below our...
So we can throw our rocks pretty fast.
Well, we can throw baseballs.
We can throw baseballs.
So the one thing different here is that a baseball is obviously not a rock.
I love the deep analysis here.
This is the hard-hitting science you come here for. Baseballs aren't rocks.
I like the problem with rocks that they're not all the same size, and they're all going different speeds.
Baseballs aren't rocks, but are rocks baseballs?
So I'm going to try to make rocks baseballs. So there's 2 things you have to take into account here. One, a rock is going to flex a lot less than a baseball, so that impact duration is going to be shorter. So kind of arbitrarily, I dropped it to 0.1 milliseconds, just because rocks are pretty solid. So I figured that was pretty safe. I don't know. Other thing is that a rock is going to be heavier than a baseball. So took the baseball's volume, which is 219 cubic centimeters. I took granite as our rock. It's a pretty nice, sort of base level rock there. Granite has a density of 2.7 grams per cubic centimeter. So our baseball, if we have a rock that is exactly baseball sized and shaped, it's going to weigh 592 grams, which is about 4 times more than that baseball. So with that heavier weight and smaller impact duration, we wind up with about 71,000 PSI, which is far more than we need to break our walls. So there is a pretty big assumption there too, which is that someone can throw a rock that weighs 4 times more than a baseball, the same speed as a baseball. So once again, I don't know how fast people can throw rocks. I dropped it to 30 miles per hour. That may still not be enough, but at least gives us a good frame of reference. And that gets us...
No, I think it's actually pretty good.
Yeah?
From having done other baseball throwing questions, the limiting factor isn't strength, it's rotation speed of the arm.
Mm-hmm.
And so you're actually not going to lose too much speed throwing a heavier object.
Oh, all right, fair. I had done a lot of annoying calculations already, and I didn't want to do any more, so that's good to hear. I will say that even if you drop it to 30 miles per hour, you're still at like 34,000 PSI, which is still enough to break the glass.
Oh, yeah, no, it's going to break. I believe you that throwing a granite rock the size of a baseball at your glass wall at speed will damage it.
You know what? You're right. That's a pretty safe assumption, huh? So, assuming we're using timber glass, yes, don't throw rocks in your house. This, surprising no one, it is actually a bad idea.
That was a clip from Absurd Hypotheticals, the podcast where we answer dumb hypothetical questions. For the full episode, click on the link in the description.